On September 20th, 1992, two massive supertankers, the Nagasaki Spirit and the tanker generally identified as the Ocean Blessing, were navigating the dense traffic of the Strait of Malacca. The vessels were moving through one of the most vital commercial arteries on the planet. The crews expected a routine transit, carefully following the established shipping lanes that guide thousands of ships between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. But in the darkness, the situation deteriorated. The collision occurred in restricted visibility and was the result of a chain of navigational errors, including radar misinterpretation and failures in maintaining safe separation within the traffic scheme. The two giants struck each other with devastating force, igniting a massive fire fueled by their volatile cargo. The disaster claimed approximately 50 lives. Tragically, many of the victims were rescue personnel who boarded the stricken vessels and succumbed to the inhalation of toxic gases, deadly consequence that outlasted the initial impact. Large quantities of oil spilled into the sea. It was a horrific reminder that in this narrow stretch of water, even the largest vessels are vulnerable to cascading failures. The collision between the Nagasaki Spirit and the Ocean Blessing was not simply a case of bad luck or an isolated tragedy. It was a symptom of a deeply congested, geographically constrained, and inherently perilous maritime environment. Year after year, the Strait of Malacca witnesses groundings, collisions, and close calls that rarely make international headlines. What makes this stretch of water so dangerous, even for modern ships equipped with radar, satellite navigation, weather forecasts, and experienced crews? The answer lies in a convergence of extreme geography, oceanographic forces, human psychology, and geopolitical realities that together create a maritime pressure cooker. To look at a chart of the Strait of Malacca is to see a perfectly manageable shipping route. It appears wide, commercially routine, and technologically controlled. According to maritime authorities, between 80,000 and 100,000 vessels transit the strait annually, making it one of the busiest shipping corridors in the world. The shipping lanes are clearly marked, traffic separation schemes are in place, and coastal authorities monitor the flow of ships. Today, modern vessels carry the Automatic Identification System, or AIS, which broadcasts their position, speed, and heading to surrounding ships and shore stations. This interconnected web of technology creates an illusion of total security. Proximity to land suggests that help is always nearby. But this familiarity is deceptive. The infrastructure and commercial importance of the strait mask a fragile reality where the margin for error is measured in mere meters and seconds. The Strait of Malacca is the main seaway connecting the Indian Ocean to the Pacific, slicing between the Malay Peninsula and the Indonesian island of Sumatra. It stretches for approximately 500 nautical miles. While the southern entrance near Singapore is wide, the navigable channel rapidly funnels inward. At its narrowest point near Phillips Channel, the strait contracts to a width of roughly 1.7 nautical miles, or just over 3 kilometers. For a waterway that accommodates massive container ships and supertankers, this is an extraordinarily tight corridor. More critically, the strait is exceptionally shallow in large sections. Submerged sandbanks, shifting shoals, and rocky outcrops severely limit the draft of vessels that can safely transit. There are critical areas where the water depth drops to around 25 meters. A fully loaded ultra-large crude carrier can sit much deeper in the water than that. As a result, these massive ships often cannot transit the strait fully loaded. They must either offload some cargo at nearby ports or take longer, deeper routes around Indonesia. The deepest natural channel is carefully charted, but the margin between a safe depth and a grounded hull is often alarmingly thin. This geographical bottleneck forces thousands of enormous ships into a tight, shallow lane, eliminating any room for evasive maneuvers when something goes wrong. The danger in the Strait of Malacca does not stem from a single geographic feature. It is produced by interconnected layers of risk that compound upon one another. The first and most relentless layer is the geography itself. The funnel-shaped coastline acts as a trap. As ships enter from the Andaman Sea in the west, the shores slowly close in. Submerged reefs and sandbars lie in wait just outside the designated traffic lanes. When a ship strays from the narrow, safe waters, the risk of grounding becomes immediate. This constrained geography directly dictates the second layer of danger: navigation. The Traffic Separation Scheme, or TSS, is the backbone of order in the strait. It functions essentially as a two-lane highway for ships, dictating one-way traffic flows to prevent head-on collisions. But unlike a highway on land, ships cannot simply hit the brakes. A fully loaded supertanker traveling at normal speed can require several nautical miles to come to a complete stop. When two giants are closing in on each other within the TSS, the physics of momentum leave very little time for human decision-making. Adding to this chaos are thousands of local fishing vessels, many of which operate without electronic transponders or adequate lighting. For a watch officer on a massive container ship, spotting a small wooden boat on radar amid the clutter of coastal returns and other large vessels is incredibly difficult. On a dark night, an unlit boat can be virtually invisible until it is far too late to alter course. The language barrier between international merchant crews and local fishermen further complicates radio communications, turning simple crossings into potential collisions. The third layer of danger involves the oceanography and the unpredictable weather of the region. The strait sits squarely within the tropics, a zone governed by monsoon seasons and violent atmospheric shifts. One of the most feared meteorological events in these waters is the Sumatra squall. These intense thunderstorm complexes can form rapidly over the mountainous spine of Sumatra and sweep eastward across the strait with little warning. When a squall hits, visibility drops to zero. Wind speeds can gust violently, turning a calm sea into a churning landscape of steep, confused waves. For a ship navigating a channel barely 3 kilometers wide with a shallow bottom, a sudden loss of visibility and fierce wind pushes the vessel perilously close to the edge of the safety zone. The shallow waters also generate complex hydrodynamic effects. When a massive vessel moves through shallow water at speed, it displaces an enormous volume of water. Because the water is squeezed between the ship's hull and the seabed, it is forced to travel faster, creating an area of low pressure under the ship. This causes the vessel to sink lower in the water than normal, a phenomenon known as squat. At the same time, the displaced water rushes back around the hull, creating strong suction toward the nearest bank. This is bank effect. If a captain tries to steer away from a shallow bank, the suction on the opposite side of the hull can pull the stern violently toward the shallows, swinging the bow into the oncoming traffic lane. In the narrow confines of the Malacca Strait, a misunderstanding of these hydrodynamic forces can quickly lead to a grounding or a head-on collision. History has demonstrated these interconnected failures with tragic regularity. On January 6, 1975, the Japanese supertanker Showa Maru was navigating the strait carrying a full load of crude oil. The vessel strayed slightly off course and ran aground on a submerged sandbank. The grounding ruptured the hull, spilling thousands of tons of oil into the sea and creating an environmental disaster. The official investigation revealed that the massive ship had experienced exactly the kind of hydrodynamic suction and squat effect that shallow waters produce. The crew, navigating with the technology of the era, failed to appreciate how the underwater topography was pulling them off course. The Showa Maru incident was a watershed moment. While it was not the only factor, it served as a crucial catalyst for change. Combined with other incidents and growing international pressure, it had forced maritime authorities to recognize that the strait was simply too shallow and too narrow for unregulated, ultra-large crude carriers, leading to the implementation of strict draft limits and the formalization of the traffic separation scheme. Yet, despite these reforms, the fundamental physics of the waterway remained unchanged. Another layer of danger, and one that uniquely defines the Strait of Malacca, is its geopolitical vulnerability. For centuries, this waterway has been plagued by piracy, the very geography that makes navigation treacherous. Countless small islands, dense mangrove coastlines, and narrow channels provides perfect cover for maritime criminals. The peak of this threat occurred between the years 2000 and 2005, when the strait was designated a high-risk area by the International Maritime Bureau. Armed groups, often operating from the Indonesian island of Sumatra, would board slow-moving vessels under the cover of darkness. In response, the coastal states launched coordinated patrols, known as the Malsindo Initiative, involving Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. These efforts, along with increased security measures on board commercial vessels, led to a sharp decline in successful pirate attacks. However, the threat has not been entirely eliminated. In November 2014, the product tanker MT Zafir was boarded by armed men while sailing off the coast of Aceh. The pirates took the crew hostage, stole their belongings, and damaged the ship's communication equipment before abandoning the crew to drift. The psychological toll on mariners transiting these waters remains a constant heavy burden. A crew that is fatigued from maintaining anti-piracy watches is a crew that is less alert to navigational hazards. The specter of violent boarding adds a layer of psychological stress that amplifies every other risk in the strait. Human psychology and organizational decision-making form another critical layer of risk. Why do experienced captains and crews make deadly mistakes in these waters? The answer often lies in the pressure of commercial schedules. In the shipping industry, time is literally money. A delay of a few hours can cost a company tens of thousands of dollars in port fees and missed cargo slots. This creates immense pressure on masters to maintain speed and avoid delays. Slowing down for a sudden squall or waiting for improved visibility might be the safest navigational choice, but it is not always the easiest one to justify to an owner sitting thousands of miles away. This commercial pressure breeds a dangerous normalization of risk. Because thousands of ships transit the strait successfully every month, there is an implicit assumption that a transit is a routine event. Continuation bias takes hold. A captain might notice a slight deviation in his course, or a fishing boat on a collision path, but assume it will correct itself because it always has before. Confirmation bias leads bridge officers to trust their GPS and electronic charts implicitly, even when their own eyes or radar suggest something is wrong. They become over-reliant on technology. It is important to remember that during the 1992 collision between the Nagasaki Spirit and the Ocean Blessing, bridge technology was far less integrated than it is today. The modern AIS and integrated bridge systems provide a level of situational awareness that simply did not exist then. Yet, even with today's advanced screens integrating radar, AIS, and electronic charts, a screen can only provide information. It cannot make a decision. When the data is misinterpreted, or when alarms are silenced out of annoyance, the technology creates a false sense of security. The belief that the ship is perfectly tracked masks the reality that a momentary lapse in human attention can still lead to disaster. Maritime disasters in the strait are rarely the result of a single dramatic failure. They develop through a sequence of small, seemingly insignificant problems that compound over time. A vessel might begin its transit slightly behind schedule. The captain increases speed slightly to make up time, which increases the ship's squat, pulling it closer to the seabed. Fatigue sets in among the officers on watch due to the high-stress environment and anti-piracy vigilance. As night falls, a Sumatra squall approaches, but the captain decides to push through rather than anchor, fearing delays and additional costs. The rain reduces visibility to a few hundred meters, and radar is cluttered by the storm. A fishing boat appears suddenly off the starboard bow. The watch officer makes a sudden, sharp turn to avoid it. In the shallow water, the sudden rudder movement triggers a violent bank effect, swinging the stern toward the shallow edge. By the time the crew realizes what is happening, the massive vessel is aground, or worse, swinging broadside into the path of an oncoming supertanker. No single error sank the ship. It was the combination of pressure, fatigue, weather, and physics. When things go wrong in the Strait of Malacca, the limitations of rescue become terrifyingly apparent. A ship sending a distress call in these congested waters faces a complex emergency response. Today, the coordination between Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia is well structured, with established protocols and joint rescue coordination centers. However, the physical realities of a maritime disaster remain daunting. If a supertanker catches fire after a collision, the heat and toxic smoke can prevent rescue vessels from getting close. As the 1992 collision tragically demonstrated, rescue personnel themselves are at severe risk from toxic gas inhalation long after the initial fire has stabilized. Survivors forced into the water face immediate perils. The strait is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. A person floating in the water is virtually invisible to a ship with a blind spot extending hundreds of meters ahead of its bow. Even if a distress beacon is activated, locating survivors in rough seas or heavy rain requires a meticulously coordinated search grid. The water temperature is warm, which delays the onset of hypothermia, but the risk of being struck by another vessel or pulled under by the hydrodynamic suction of a passing giant is severe. Evacuating a crew of 20 or 30 people from a burning or sinking ship using lifeboats in the dark amid heavy traffic and high winds is a scenario where small failures in procedure can lead to tragedy. The Strait of Malacca forces a broader reflection on humanity's relationship with the ocean and the fragile nature of global trade. Modern civilization depends utterly on vulnerable sea routes. A massive share of the world's oil and commercial trade passes through this single choke point. The entire architecture of the global economy is balanced on the assumption that ships will continue to move through these narrow waters without interruption. Yet the strait demonstrates that technology has not removed uncertainty from the sea. The ocean remains indifferent to human schedules, corporate balance sheets, and economic pressure. Routine exposure to this waterway can make its extreme danger feel normal. Sailors transit it every day, trusting in their electronics and the rules of the road. But the Strait of Malacca is a constant reminder that enormous ships, the largest moving objects created by human engineering, can still be rendered powerless against the combination of shallow water, sudden storms, and the rigid limits of geography. The safety of this vital artery relies as much on human humility and vigilance as it does on maritime engineering. Overconfidence is just as hazardous as a submerged reef. The collision between the Nagasaki Spirit and the Ocean Blessing in 1992 was a tragic culmination of these overlapping forces. Two giants forced into a narrow channel, operating in restricted visibility, relying on fragmented technology and human judgment under immense pressure. The disaster was not an anomaly, but a window into the true nature of the Strait of Malacca. It is a place where geography, weather, water, machinery, traffic, and human judgment operate together with a remarkably thin margin for error. The strait is not dangerous because it is malicious or supernatural. It is dangerous because it demands unwavering vigilance in an environment where the potential for cascading failure is always present. As long as the world relies on the steady flow of goods through these shallow, constrained waters, the maritime danger zone of the Strait of Malacca will endure, testing the limits of human skill and technology with every transit.